Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Austin.
My name is Josiah.
This is a special ASMR episode of the Super Cinema A lady is walking on the beach. Her toes are touching the sand. It makes soft crunching sounds. The waves are hitting her feet. How's it going, Josiah?
It's going well, man. Yeah, this has been a really busy day for me, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you appreciate that we're playing around with new formats. We're trying to get that ad revenue as soon as possible. And if ASMR is the way to do it, then that's what we're going to do. So thank you for tuning in. This is a special mini episode of the Super Cinema Bros. As we promised in our Godzilla -1 review, we were going to watch the special edition Godzilla minus color release and tell you about it. So this will not be a full review of the movie Godzilla -1. Please stay tuned for that episode. It should be dropping very, very soon. This is a special mini episode talking about the minus color special release. So with that said, we're going to jump right into it. Mr. Josiah, how did you like Godzilla minus color?
Eco! Man, this film is phenomenal. I love it more every time. I think I watched it before though. But this, minus color, it blew me away. I think this is I very much from the first frame of this first shot of this film, seeing the plane flying in over the water, I was sold. That water looked amazing in black and white. And in the time period in the movie, 99.9% of it worked for me in black and white. And I didn't even miss the color, except for a couple small things. I will bring those up later, though. How about you, man?
Yeah, I actually enjoyed this movie more in black and white than I did in color, and I really enjoyed it in color. They sold me at the very beginning where they showed like the Toho Cinema logo. I believe it was first in color. And then they did a complete throwback. And they showed you the Toho Cinema old school 1950s, 1960s title screen.
Yeah.
And I was so sold from that moment on. I was a little bit, I definitely wasn't skeptical. I was very much looking forward to seeing what they were going to do. But I was a little bit like, are they just going to do like a cheesy sepia tone, black and white monochrome, like screen, film stock, what do you call it? Emulation, like a Fujifilm camera or something like that? Is it going to look kind of cheesy? And the black and white isn't going to look tacked on?
Marks and stuff all over the screen and like errors.
Yeah, maybe that. Or was it just going to look like when they do black and white scenes on like network television shows, and it's just kind of campy?
Yeah,
I was a slight bit concerned about that.
Sure.
But once I saw the movie, the first 5 minutes, those fears were, I was relieved of those fears.
Yeah, definitely. There was they did have a bit of a vignette on the movie, right? I was actually pretty close to the screen this time, and I think there was a little bit of vignette. And I feel like there was, at least on my screen, and talking to my friend for his previous screening, there's maybe even like the hint of color in the top right and bottom left, like in the actual vignette itself. Did you wind up noticing that at all in your screening?
I did not. I sat pretty far back, kind of dead center in the upper part of the theater.
Yeah.
In fairness, I wasn't looking for that. My eyes weren't tracking for that, but it wasn't particularly obvious either. so it didn't draw any attention to itself if it was there.
Yeah.
But you know what? It reminded me of The Lighthouse. That's what it reminded me of in terms of like the way it looked in black and white. Have you seen The Lighthouse with Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson?
Yeah.
That was a black and white movie, and it seemed to be at that level of monochrome film quality. And so, yeah, I didn't have any issues with it. Now, in fairness, this is true of some American-made Hollywood movies, particularly like even more so than Hollywood movies, like some newer generation Netflix shows. I'm thinking of Cowboy Bebop, the live action version of Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah.
Where all the sets and all the costumes look like they just came out of the shrink wrap, you know? And nothing felt particularly lived in. It didn't feel authentic in a manner of speaking.
Sure.
There was no natural dust or grime on environments that you would think would have dust and grime. It looked like they were on a film set in certain scenes. And so
in Cowboy Bebop.
In Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah.
If I was going to give like a criticism of Godzilla -1, maybe it was that because of the cameras they were using, high definition cameras, sometimes things look a little superficially bright or vibrant. Things don't have the kind of like wear and tear. It looks like it was a new set that was built, even if it's like showing like, you know, carnage or mayhem or, you know, an explosion went off somewhere. Sometimes it just looks really brand new. And maybe there were a couple scenes like that in passing. Yeah. Like when the new house was being constructed during like the time lapse in that part of the movie. Okay, maybe things look a little bit, you know, superficial, artificial, I should say.
Yeah.
And some of that looks that way even in black and white. And so that's a light criticism.
Yeah.
And again, that has to do with high definition cameras and the work that cinematographers do to not create the soap opera effect. I remember there was some conference for like radio or television and broadcasting where Peter Jackson was demoing like 4K high definition cameras for, I think, one of the Lord of the Rings movies or Hobbit movies. I can't remember which one. And people said it looked like a Mexican soap opera because like the color was so punchy and so bright. And so it takes some work to kind of like desaturate things and still keep it in like ultra high definition, 4K or whatever the case may be. I even remember watching like, you know, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And some of those movies, like, you know, it was a 4K movie, and some of those scenes, I should say, had that kind of like hyper realistic look to them. And so I think we've come a long way since the initial like concerns about that, and filmmakers have really done a good job of either embracing it and making it part of the visual aesthetic of the film. But all of that to say, if I was going to give a slight criticism, is that there were a couple scenes or maybe some scenes here and there where things didn't look like they were in war-ravaged Tokyo post-World War II. Had a little bit of shine to it, and that isn't removed by putting it in black and white.
That's true. Yeah, I can understand that. It didn't necessarily stand out to me as much, but the things that did. So one, the home that you're talking about, that I think it was supposed to look pretty pristine.
Yeah, it was a new house. It was new construction. So it's like, this is multiple levels of nitpickiness on Austin's part.
Totally. Yeah. I think some of those scenes for me, there were a few CG effects. I don't know if any of these backgrounds that you're talking about were potentially CG effects that did stand out as a bit odd. In particular, Godzilla's whitewash that he created, like while he was swimming, that definitely had like a digital sort of a look to it. Which I've talked to a friend, he said he noticed it for sure in the color version. I remember seeing it sometimes here in the color version as well. But the scene in particular at the end where Godzilla's charging up his heat blast underneath the water while he's swimming. That scene unfortunately didn't come across super clear for me because the whitewash was already white, and then his glow from the charging was white again. So I didn't actually fully tell that he was charging the beam until he actually shot it out of his mouth.
Interesting.
And the whitewash and like looking at his spine in the water was just like hyper white. So that didn't necessarily work out great for me. And that was like one of the drawbacks of not having the color. Some of those details here and there wind up being masked by each other, which then also connects to, and another friend pointed this out, and I took some note of it also. You can tell that compared to The Lighthouse, this movie was not shot for black and white. So there are definitely some scenes where the lighting of the characters was not optimal for black and white. And now I think they did a lot post to adjust those colors and just the balances of the white and blacks for this version. But there's some things that, like, had it been shot with the idea of it being in black and white, they would have made different choices from the lighting standpoint, potentially even different choices in the colors that people were wearing as well. I remember seeing some like behind the scenes for like I Love Lucy and being a little bit surprised here and there by like the color choices for the outfits. But it was because those colors worked better for the black and white version. Versus like had they chosen those colors strictly for a color version. So vice versa happens. The colors that work great in color may not work as well with black and white, and so they have to do some post processing effects to make those adjustments.
Right. Yeah, I understand. Like that's also a consideration when they're doing makeup, for color versus for black and white.
Yeah,
how the way that the light hits the face and the skin, and how that impacts the resulting image. Those are considerations they have to take, they have to make in order to get the character's face, the actor or the actress's face look correct in color or in black and white.
Yeah.
Now,
were there any things that you really liked in black and white?
Yeah. So actually, just to piggyback on what you were saying in terms of like one scene that I definitely noticed was like CG. You were talking about the end. I actually noticed it in the very beginning. So after they get picked up by the big cargo ship and all the people are like on that ship and he hands them the picture, when that ship is sailing and it's in the water, you have that overhead shot. That looked more CG in black and white and I recall it looking in color. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's definitely a CG boat kind of, going through. It still looked good. It just like, okay, it kind of looks CG. So yeah, I mean, there were a couple like these are little like nitpicks that you noticed.
Did the tank scene look any better to you in black and white?
That tank scene has always looked like Advance Wars, Nintendo Advance Wars, black and white color, sepia tone, pastel, acid trip. That looks like a Nintendo Advance, or like the Switch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're like that scene was definitely Square Enix right there. Yeah, they
yeah. So apparently
quoted from a mobile game of theirs.
Yeah, so I did some research and apparently there's a visual effects and there's an animation and visual effect company called Shirogumi Incorporated, and they did a lot of the special effects. And a lot of the animatronic modeling was done by Square Enix. And so it wasn't just Square Enix, but Square Enix did some of the motion capture. That's what I was trying to say. The motion capture. And so, again, my hat's still off to Square Enix. I still think they did a fantastic job. But it wasn't just Square Enix. It's also Shirogumi. And Shirogumi, I started going down the rabbit hole, looking at their website and all the different things they've done. They've done a whole bunch of really cool stuff. Commercials, animation, movies, kind of everything. And so there are a lot of super talented people that were behind the making of this film. Okay, now you were asking what I liked, and that's kind of what I really want to get into.
Exactly, totally. Let's do it.
Okay, so first off, right off the bat, like the difference between the American Godzilla and the Japanese Godzilla, both being CG computer generated.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen any of the old Godzilla movies where there's like a baby Godzilla or like Godzilla Jr. and it has these
I've
really
seen some of
beady
them.
eyes. Yeah,
Yeah, I've
it's like
seen
little
some of them.
kid Godzilla and he's got these really beady eyes, almost kind of cartoonish eyes. I
Yeah.
feel like they use
Mm-hmm.
those eyes, but they put them on like the big full size Godzilla. And it gives
Mm.
it a certain type of personality that is completely missing in the American version. Completely not there.
Yeah.
And so again, and you see this most clearly like during the Jaws scene, right? Where it's trailing, is following the small little
Mm-hmm.
dinghy, and
Yeah.
you see these big beady eyes. I'm like, you would almost you would be forgiven for saying, oh, that's kind of cute if it wasn't for this just giant thing. But those eyes have so much personality. And
They
it
really
harkens back
do.
to the original Godzilla movies in
Yeah.
ways that the American movies don't even try to do, right? And
Yeah,
so,
the representation of the eyes, like you're saying, it I wouldn't say betrays it. It indicates so much like presence and intelligence
yeah,
that he has.
yeah, there's a certain soul, there's a certain essence to this being, you know, and yeah, and even like when they drop like the hydrogen bomb, and like you see these things like the scales are getting ripped off and stuff, and it's being
Yeah.
affected by nuclear power. You still see the eyes, right? And
Yeah.
so, like the depth of the soul and the character of this giant monster is clearly seen in the eyes. And if you watch Shin Godzilla, the Japanese movie that was directed by Hideaki Anno, the guy that the mastermind, the creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Yeah.
Even in that movie, particularly like in the earlier forms of Godzilla, not to give away too much of the movie, but like these eyes are like front and center,
Gigantic. Yeah.
gigantic.
Extremely
And
prominent.
yes, yes, the eyes are super important. Japanese filmmakers, they understand that in ways that like
Mm-hmm.
the American filmmakers, Hollywood, it's just a creature. It's just a giant lizard. Um, that may be cultural because at heart, Godzilla is like an analogy and symbolism for like the atomic bomb and for
Oh,
nuclear power and ecological, environmental kind of doomsdayism in Japan.
mm-hmm.
So like, it almost makes sense that in a sense, uh, they treat the being and the character and the creature as almost like a creature that has an axe to grind with humanity for what it's doing to the earth, because its
Mm-hmm.
being, its existence is the byproduct of nuclear waste, ecological neglect, whatever you want to call it. And so again, all of these things, all of these little subtexts just in the eyes of Godzilla that are totally present in the Japanese versions and iterations of Godzilla, totally absent from the American versions, to the American version's detriment. And that
Yeah.
has to do with Japanese history versus American history. And so, getting back to this movie, I think I would say that the scenes where Godzilla isn't walking around and his little arms aren't moving around and he isn't taking these big steps, like the less you see of his entire front profile, I think the
Okay.
better. When you see,
Hmm.
like for example, there's the scene where the radio broadcaster is like out, he's on the roof, and
Yeah.
we can see this terrifying head. Da, 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 da. Okay, in
Yeah.
that
Moment by
scene,
moment.
Godzilla is giant, right? He's the size of a skyscraper, but you're only seeing like maybe up to his top torso, his head and his top torso.
Sure.
You don't even
Yeah.
quite see his arms. And then they cut to another scene where you just see his tail smashing into the building, and then they fall, and all these things happen. I almost feel like it works to the benefit to not show his entire front profile because like he the movement of Godzilla
See,
in
does
some
he look
scenes
kind
is
of
really
goofy too?
awkward. Say it again.
He's I was asking if he looks sort of goofy.
Yeah, it's like these big, it's like it's kind of like the T-Rex problem, but where the T-Rex
Sure.
is generally lower to the ground, has a giant head, and it slopes forward. Godzilla stands upright, so he just has like these little nubs for arms that do essentially nothing, and either he's blowing fire and screaming and roaring, or he's just stepping on stuff or swinging around his tail. So like
Yeah.
when you just see those little useless arms, it's like it doesn't add to the like horror I feel like you should be feeling when you look at Godzilla.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. I've had people talk to me about that as well. And it goes back to the character design. They very much were paying homage to the original designs, and they wanted, I think, to be able to keep the idea of it could be a man in a suit and, what came from those designs specifically. And then in
Right.
contrast, they do make his legs pretty big. I think honestly in the American version with Gareth Edwards, they made his legs like even more gigantic. But I don't remember if they balanced that out, his arms out. I think they maybe balanced his arms out a little bit more. But I do understand where you're coming from. And as I had also noted when I first watched the movie, when he's moving on land, especially later on when he goes onto land and is like walking through a small little village and Shikishima is flying the plane around him.
Right.
You do notice how slow he is. And there's a certain sort of like layered overlapping action to like how he walks, like when he's on land, that can kind of look a little bit cheesy sometimes. So
Right.
like continuing what you're saying though, I very much like it when we are getting specific sections of Godzilla, whether it's just his head and his spines while he's going through the water. I absolutely love that look. Or even when he like brings his torso up out of the water, I think he looks pretty awesome that way too. And then highlighted when he's swimming, you do have a couple scenes where he's like swimming, and when he's in that orientation, I think he looks better as well versus just like standing on land. And to all of this end, I think this movie does a great job highlighting that Godzilla is first and foremost an aquatic creature that has the ability to go onto land.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so my favorite scenes are, again, they're in a little wooden dinghy and they're supposed to be backing up, the big ships that are supposed to come and save them as this giant monster is approaching. I loved all of that. And I think all of that works exceedingly well in black and white.
Yes. Yes, it does.
Again, the Jaws scene where his mouth is open and, it's so Spielbergian.
Yeah, it
Like,
totally is.
all right, it could have been Indiana Jones and the Lizard of Doom, right? All right, put the mine in his mouth. All right, hit the button. Click, 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 click. Oh, they pull it back. Oh crap, it's disconnected. Oh, what do we got to do now? And then they got to figure it out. And then this, and then that. Like this is vintage Spielberg, and that's great. It's great. And yeah, that's like the best scene in the movie because the only reason that the main character survived that scene is because Godzilla was like, you know what? Forget this. I'm out. And then he just deuces and he goes back underwater for reasons unknown, right?
Well,
he destroys 2 ships. I mean, he takes some damage, so maybe that has something to do with it. He shot his breath off at least once, maybe twice. I can't remember. And then he's like, I'm out. And he disappears.
That is fair.
Yeah.
That is fair. Yeah. He could have, he does turn away and then dives into the water, which by the way, yeah, I'll get to this in a moment. Yeah. Every time they use Godzilla and whatever they do with his actions, I think it's so very specific and beautiful. But yeah, I think that's because they were a small distraction. He had been like bombarded by boat after boat after boat trying to stop him for like this last year or something like that. I think he has a natural inclination to attack boats, but he still is this like apex predator creature. He still is a creature in mind. So I think when the Takao showed up and shot him several times, and then he destroys ultimately. I think that became the bigger threat. And so once he overcame that big threat, then the small boat was nothing to him all of a sudden. So then he pieces out. So he took down the challenger in the arena essentially at that moment, and is left to do other things. But yeah, technically you're right. He could have went back and just destroyed them, and the movie would have been over at that
Yeah,
point.
he could have just flipped his tail up at the end. Boom,
Yeah,
gone.
yeah,
But
totally.
yeah, yeah. Even my memory of certain scenes, I feel like watching it a second time, it got better. Like when the love interest, I forget her name, the lady, the woman in his
Noriko.
life. Nori, say it again.
Noriko.
Noriko, yes. When she pushes my man into the alleyway and just gets,
Yeah.
I feel like that. I don't know, for some reason that just like it came across better in black and white. Now I still contend that there's no way that she would have ever survived a blast like that. Her internal organs would have been instantly not only liquefied but vaporized.
Yeah, and that's after she's skewered by everything, on the street for 2 miles.
I mean, yeah, like, yeah, I mean, I mean, whatever, yeah, she would have just been completely gone.
Yeah.
At the same time, like, I'm a sentimental guy now, and I'm a whole lot mushier than I used to be in my 20s and 30s. And when I saw my man with the little Akiko running up the stairs, the love of his life, his woman, who he can now love because his war is now over.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, man, it like drop kicked me in the feels. Like, I'm like, all right, like, I'm just gonna choke up for a second. Like, I kind of want to see stuff like that. For anybody who's younger, if you're like a young adult, or if you're like your 20s or 30s, and like emotional scenes don't affect you or whatever, that's cool. Just give it like 10, 15, 20 years and, become an uncle, become a father, become a grandfather, and stuff's going to choke you up like never before. Even if it's cheesy and it's cheesy, it doesn't matter. Like, the heart wants what the heart wants. And I watched this movie again a second time. I knew what was going to happen. I think the part that choked me up the most is when the next door neighbor, she's carrying Akiko, and she arrives where, the ship is docked, and everyone's, saying, Shikishima, congratulations, they're giving him hugs, and they're dapping him up, all that stuff. And she runs up to him with the letter. And she's like hitting him, but it's not like a real, like, she's not assaulting him. She's like, that's her way of showing, like, I was worried about you. I care about you. You put me through so much emotional turmoil. I thought we'd lost you, but like Japanese people don't like explain themselves like that generally. But it all made sense when she was kind of like punching his shoulder. She's like, like, don't give up yet.
Yep. You're alive. You're alive. You're tangible still. You're here still.
Yeah, actually, that actually hit me more in the feels than him actually going up to see, Noriko. I mean, that was kind of like the icing on it. And, it kind of gives you like closure. You can kind of like sigh in relief when you see that. And it's cheesy and it's not particularly realistic, but you don't care because you just want to feel like it's a happy ending. They beat Godzilla, and doggone it, I want to feel good inside, and that's okay.
True. They do add on a little bit of a moment there. Still, did you see the symbiote showing up on her neck this time?
Oh, you know what? I think I yes, I did notice that.
Yeah.
So okay, so I guess it's designed to be somewhat bittersweet. I don't know. Is there going to be a
Mhm.
direct sequel to this movie? You know, Godzilla minus
Mhm.
two. Like I don't know. Like what are they going to do? I can't guess it. I can't call it. But
It could just be Godzilla 1. Could be.
or Godzilla zero and then one.
Maybe. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even really remember why they called it minus one. It was something that was explained very quickly in the beginning of the movie, I believe. It kind of doesn't matter. This is just
I
so
actually
you know this movie is
don't
different
know.
than another different Godzilla movie because there's like 30 Godzilla movies. In summary, yeah, if you've seen this in color, I still think I still think it's worth seeing again in black and white. I think
Most
they did a really
definitely.
good job, and the black and white does not look like a Adobe Premiere filter that was put through it. Thank God, because that could have been a real
That could have
disaster
been.
if they weren't
That could have
very
been pretty
careful about
bad.
how they did it. So there were some very skillful, color correctionists, color graders that really
Yeah.
thoughtfully kind of combed through each scene and made sure it looked the way it's supposed to look. Particularly the
True.
Godzilla scenes, they looked fantastic.
Which to that point, let me add on a couple things that worked really well for me in this film for the black and white version in particular. One,
Okay.
I really came to love the way the water looked in black and white. And I think it just because it reminded me of what water does look in like older black and white films, and whether that's just memory or not, I think it looked awesome. Besides, yes, the whitewash element, but the water itself. Second scene after the landing of the plane, when we wind up seeing the mechanics in their outfits, right away I was like, yes, these outfits from that time period works completely for me in black and white. And that applied even to the environments that looked like they were from an older time period. I remember when the crew had just been told by the professor what the plan was, and they were drinking in a bar, and they were giving him a hard time. Captain was giving him a hard time about like how many holes were in his plan. Basically, they had a wide shot there where they were on the right side of the screen, the left, and the environment they were in, and the left side of the screen was very much in older style Japanese, which they still have some places that look like that, but very much an older style Japanese building. That looked phenomenal to me in black and white because it reminded me, if I looked at just that left half of the film, of what I remember like the Seven Samurai looking like. Now there
Mm,
was this, yeah, it didn't have like as much of some of the film grain that the actual older movies do have, or even maybe some potential frame rate differences that some of the older movies have. But the set
right.
itself and the costuming looks completely what I would have expected from a black and white film. So that, yeah, those two things worked especially for me. And then the final thing that worked amazingly for me was, yeah, Godzilla himself. I technically felt like I saw less detail for him. I think that wound up working in the movie's favor for me. Now, a friend of mine saw it twice in minus color.
Yeah,
His
I
first
agree.
reaction
Yeah.
was his first reaction was, yeah, he some things were harder to see. Like for instance, the scene where there's all the debris flying down the street in both directions. That scene was more of a blur for me. I couldn't make out the buildings as distinctly from all the debris. But yeah, going back to Godzilla himself, he also was darker, and some of his details were masked, which I think worked extremely well because it again reminded me of what he looked like in the past. And I think there's something really awesome to have some level of detail obscured or harder to make out when it comes to like a monster creature in something, in a thriller horror kind of setting.
Right. So two thoughts while they're on my mind. Number one, if you've ever watched like Advent Children or any like the Animatrix,
Yeah.
the the Black American or the African American or the Black characters, I always felt like they looked more realistic because darker skin tones absorb light and don't reflect it. So they don't look as plasticky as lighter skin characters do. In the same way, I agree. I think that the lack of color, uh, in some ways, just creates a darker, more ominous Godzilla with less contrast. I'm not even sure if contrast is the right word or the word exactly that I'm looking for, but in a way that I think works to its favor, right? Because number one, it's an homage. So like the kind of details that you didn't see are the same kind of details you wouldn't see in a movie made in the 1950s. So that makes sense and it tracks in that regard.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Like I think like the lack of detail or the lack of like fine detail or contour or contrast because there's no color, it's just black and white, and it's just degrees of white or degrees of black, shades of gray, that kind of thing. In some ways you do see less, but sometimes less is more, which kind of which kind of segues into the point that I was making, which is this movie was originally released in full color and then re-released in black and white. And not only is nothing lost in the transition from color to black and white, I would argue, just personally, that there are things that are gained. Because there's a sense of emotion, there's a sense of gravity and depth that only exist in black and white films, that simply don't exist in color films in the same way. I don't know if you remember in the 90s, there was a push to colorize like television shows and movies. You know, notable examples are like I Love Lucy, colorizing that, or The Wizard of Oz, colorizing that. And it was always somewhat controversial depending on, you know, where you stood on the issue. Maybe for some film purists, they didn't like that because, you know, again, all the decisions regarding makeup, all the decisions regarding set design, all the decisions regarding wardrobe were based on the reality and the fact that it was being shot in black and white. Exactly. And so to colorize it, it's almost like a betrayal of all those decisions that were made thoughtfully and artfully by the people who were making those decisions, that were making that film. And so how would I say this? Going from color to black and white, I don't think you lose anything. Now, conversely, if you went from black and white and then re-released this movie in color, I almost feel like something would have been missed. I almost feel like something would have been lost in translation, or it just wouldn't have been the same experience. I don't know what it is about black and white. It kind of makes me think like if you're a photography enthusiast, if you're a camera buff, you love Leica cameras, right? Now there's like certain Leica cameras, you know, Leica is lauded for its color science and the sharpness of its lenses and that Leica look. And they have some cameras that, like, you know, you could buy the camera version or you could buy the monochrome version of that same camera. And sometimes that monochrome version is even more expensive than the color version. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? Or why not just put like, you know, take out the color from the color file and just make it black and white? And technically you can do that. But there's something about the color science or the shade and degradation science of a monochrome photo.
Yeah.
That just elicits something and produces a different emotion upon viewing that image, you know, the finished image. And I think the same is true of this movie and the decision to go from color to black and white. In the same way, I don't think that The Lighthouse would have worked in color the same way. I don't think that this movie would have worked the same way if they'd gone from black and white and then tried to color it afterwards, or release the color version afterwards. I'm kind of glad they did it the way that they did. Not just for the sake of paying homage to the original films, but because a black and white movie is different than a color movie. And yeah, sometimes subtracting the saturation of color really adds to the experience in different ways. And so,
yeah, I believe I 100% agree. I think it may have something to do with removing the color as one less element that's contending with our attention for a number of things, whether it's where we're supposed to be looking. We're able to potentially focus a little bit more on the actual drama, the action, if they've staged the color and lighting correctly and well, and yeah, contrast, where we are drawn to contrasts. So if they're taking advantage of that and using that to their strength, then they're able to help direct us and guide us more. But like you're saying, I think there's also an element of, within the simplicity, it's almost as if they've added a layer that separates us potentially one more small stage from recognizing that this was filmed in real life in 2022, 2023, and allows us to see it as more of a story, which I would compare also to, you brought up a little bit earlier about high frame rate recording. I think for a number of people, when something's recorded at a higher frame rate, it triggers that soap opera effect. It triggers in our mind a recognition of reality a little bit more, versus when it's 24 frames or 30 frames, and that itself is separating us from our everyday average experience. It, in our minds, allows us to see this as, this is a story, this is separated from the reality. I think that black and white can help in similar regard to further make this a little bit more separated from reality and help ground it a little bit more in it being a story. And a friend of mine, I also did point out that, yeah, he, for some reason, felt like the drama and the performances hit a little bit stronger for him in the black and white.
Yeah, I'll say connected. Even some of the cheesiness, particularly that chief scientist, when he was giving that big speech and they zoomed the camera in on him, he gave that like that goofy facial expression. I was like, this is so silly, but I still kind of like it.
We're going to defeat him with the power of the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever he said. But he gave like this super like cheesy, stark, like facial expression. And then as it zoomed in, I'm like,
yeah,
I love this. Exactly. This is so corny. I love this. This is great.
It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So we said this was going to be a mini review. I don't even know if that's true anymore. Whatever.
Play us in double time. It'll be done in 20 minutes.
Yeah. Run is the 2x. Yeah, but again, go see this movie if it's still out in theaters by the time you watch this review. It's great. It's great.
It's phenomenal.
It is a fantastic homage to the original Godzilla films that were in black and white. And just as a standalone movie, it's just a great like action, suspense, sci-fi thriller, whatever you want to call it. It has good human drama, and it's just a lot of fun. I watched it twice. I generally do not rewatch movies unless they're like, if it's like The Godfather, if it's Shawshank Redemption, if it's Good Will Hunting, if it's Drive, if it's, I don't know. There's a couple movies that I really enjoy watching repeatedly, but not that many. And I generally will not go to a theater to watch a movie twice. Like, I feel like once I've seen it, and my impression is what it is. But for this movie, I was like, no, I'm definitely going to see this when it's in black and white. And I'm glad that I did. And so
go watch it.
This comes as a high recommendation for me. It sounds like you feel the same way, Josiah.
Oh, definitely. The sad truth is, I think this was maybe only a week, so it might not be available by the time you hear this. I really hope it is, but if it's not, I hope they put it in the Blu-ray with the color. I don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to sell it as two separate things, but it needs to be watched in both color and in both black and white.
Yeah, I agree. They're two different experiences, and they're both worthwhile experiences. All right, so with that concludes our air quotes mini review of Godzilla Minus Color. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you can be notified on all future episodes of the Super Cinema.
You know what it is.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us in our conversation. Please share with us your views, your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements in the comments section. We'd be really interested to hear what you
We'll
say.
completely read them all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Like up until the point where we like hit it big and completely sell out, we are reading these comments. Up until the point where we pay somebody else to do it. Yeah. You know, we'd love to hear what you have to say about the movie.
It's up to you guys. Y'all can keep us in check. We might never get there. So we'll just keep reading the comments.
Yeah.
In your hands.
Maybe you'll keep us humble. Like you'll like and subscribe, but you'll make sure that your friends don't. You know? Listen, you got to live your life. You do what you got to do for you. In all seriousness, though, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
We have a lot of fun having these conversations, and we're happy to bring everybody else in with us. So, on behalf of the Super Cinema Bros, my name is Austin.
My name is Josiah.
And until next time, God bless. And yeah, we got more episodes coming. I think this episode and one more episode will be just audio. And we are mulling over a decision to show our faces. So stay tuned for the big reveal. Until then, again, thank you so much. God bless you. And we'll catch you in the next one.
God bless you guys. Peace.